Hi, and welcome to Cover Brand, where we cover all things branding, marketing, and advertising to help you understand what the hell branding is and how it works to grow your business. Welcome and welcome back to Cover Brand. I am Ethan Decker, and today I have Casey Hill from Do What Works. Casey, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
I have to ask about the ship behind you. There's a painting of a ship behind Casey. We will get to that soon. First, we have to start with cover songs, as we always do. Even on the special Shop Talk episode. Today's a Shop Talk episode. But first and foremost, Casey, I think you might have stumped me this time because I asked you for a cover song. And what did you come back with?
I said Hans Zimmer from Gladiator. Now We Are Free, or maybe some Howard Shores, who did a lot of the stuff for Lord of the Rings. Those were the two that came to mind for me.
Okay, so we're talking orchestral soundtrack music from big movies.
That's right.
And didn't Hans Zimmer also do Dune, I mean?
I think so. Yeah, he's connected to a lot of these kind of like very epic, grand films.
So he did the music for Gladiator is what you're saying.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard a cover version of that.
It might be tricky. It might be tricky.
It might be really tricky, partly because it's just so orchestral and partly because Hans Zimmer in particular, if you remember, well, I hear the music of Dune in my head more than I do the music of Gladiator, but it's this kind of thrumming, he's got lots of sound and kind of intensity and depth to it, and it's not very melodic, if I'm remembering correctly. Is that true?
I mean, I think that might be true for Dune. I would argue that Gladiator is pretty melodic and is definitely more of like a softer epic type of tune. So I think it might vary, but it definitely is like very complex sound, I would say. I mean, that kind of goes into like the orchestral kind of component. There's a lot of kind of things happening. So I think it has like a good amount of depth, but it's definitely not like highly lyrical. Right. So I think that's
makes it hard to cover. And it's not as melodic, I would think, as like a John Williams who scored Harry Potter and Star Wars, right? So like I could imagine at some point Ariana Grande at least referencing, and I'm sure some hip hop artists have already referenced like the dun 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 dun. That's the Harry Potter theme.
Yeah.
But they would probably not cover it as much as they might just either sample or kind of reference in the song, that kind of stuff. The way.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Gwen Stefani did "Lay O Lay O Lay Ooh" in one of her songs?
That has, yeah.
I think it was Hollaback Girls or something.
Yeah. It was some big recollection.
The Lonely Goat Herd from Singing in the Rain. Not Singing in the Rain, no, from Sound of Music. Yep. Anyway, little echoes. But Hans Zimmer would be really tough to cover.
We'll have to give it some thought. We'll have to give that one some thought.
We'll do some homework on that. But that's your walk-on music, is like one of the themes from Gladiator.
Yeah, that's my go-to.
Okay. We will do some homework. We'll look into whether anyone's ever covered Hans Zimmer, and we'll be right back with more of Casey Hill after these messages. Cover Brand is supported by Segmentation Eau de Toilette, the new fragrance for those who slice up their market. It has beautiful high notes of occasions with just a hint of demographics. Segmentation Eau de Toilette. Show the world you have focus. Welcome back. Now it's time to cover some brand stuff. And today is a Shop Talk episode where I get to talk to another practitioner of the dark marketing arts and talk about what brand science has to say about those things, or how brand science shows up in those workings. So Casey, a lot of people don't know what you do at Do What Works. Can you tell the crowd what it is Do What Works does?
Yeah, for sure. So Do What Works basically looks across the entire web, and we see, based on public data, anyone who's running an A/B test. So any brand, Nike, Disney, NFL, MLB, any brand in the world, when they're running an A/B test, we can kind of detect those slight variants. We aggregate this at scale, and we can see what type of imagery, what type of messaging, what type of copy wins in these tests. And then we aggregate those across thousands and thousands of tests. So we can
Huh.
say, for streaming companies, we look across all the major streaming companies,
Okay.
say, hey, does a grid layout of your sample shows, or does this other layout perform better? And we can say
Huh.
we've seen 86 tests across this, and 79 of them, this format wins. So we see at
Okay.
least a strong qualitative signal that is like a best practice. So that's
So,
what we're doing.
okay. So when we're talking about A/B tests, what's like the simplest A/B test example you can provide that
Yeah.
you might have actually studied as well from either a Nike or a Domino's Pizza or something?
Super, super simple A/B test that tons of brands experiment with is 1 or 2 buttons when you first go to the website. You first land on the website. Is there 1 CTA or is there 2 CTA? That means call to action
Okay.
button. So that's a super simple test. We've seen tens of thousands of companies test 1 or 2 buttons, or like, what is the copy on your button?
And
So
when
does
they
it say,
test that,
yeah,
Casey, do they have usually like half of America gets 2 buttons on the home screen and half of America gets 1 button on the home screen? Or do they say like 99% gets 2 buttons because that's what we use, and then 1%, which is by the way like 3 million people or a million people, gets 2 buttons? Like what's the
yeah,
ratio of A versus B in a test?
yeah, great question. I think it varies dramatically based on the size and scale of the company. So if you're talking about the Netflixes and you're talking about the Disneys and these huge at scale brands, then
Mhm.
the answer is they tend to have very nuanced tests, right? They're not just going 50-50. They're
Okay.
doing not only broken out into, maybe they have 4 different versions, but on top of that, they're highly localized. So
Okay.
oftentimes, if they're going to do an ambitious test, they'll test it in certain like similar geos. So let's go test this in certain areas of the EU before we do it in the US. Let's go test it in these other
Okay.
spots. And depending on how ambitious that test is, it could be as small as 5% of their web traffic goes
Right.
to this test, just enough that they can get a statistically significant signal, and then they'll
Right.
come back. So
Right. If it's
it
like a
varies.
radical shift to their homepage, they might do that
Exactly.
in a very small group and do it somewhere in a not important market.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so and not only do they do A/B tests where they've got version A versus version B, they might be doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P tests where they've got 20 different versions of the homepage at the same
It,
time.
100%. And now kind of just like A/B best practices, right? We know that the more that you control for single variables, the more
Yep.
robust the test is. Meaning we want
Yes.
everything to be the same except for one very specific change. Now,
Correct.
brands do not always do that, right? So that's what we
Wait,
want.
you mean
Um,
brands don't always follow the best
so,
scientific practice?
so that's what we want, but they don't always do it. But we actually have an algorithm that we built out that is very robust, where we actually have a weighting system. So the
Okay.
more that a test is isolated, the more valuable that test result is. Versus if a company has 12 variables changed, we might still include that in our pool of data, but it's massively diluted in terms of its weighting factor
Right.
because there's so many confounding variables in that
So
situation.
if they're doing an A, B, C, D, E, F, G test and they're changing the color and the button size and the button shape and the text of the button, then those are 4 different variables already. So you weight that lower because it's harder to tease apart what really made the difference.
100%. And
Yeah.
usually what we'll do, like we've had a couple of brands recently, like Spotify is one example that did like a total website rebrand.
Hmm.
So we actually, in those cases, because they're changing everything, they're changing their copy, their positioning, like all the images, all the flow,
Mm.
that is less going to plug into specific insights. And it's more going to be kind of like a overall
Right.
novelty in and of itself, where we present it. These people just did a rebrand. This is the version that won when they tested in this rebrand. And this
Mm.
is kind of interesting for these reasons, but we wouldn't necessarily plug it into it like a data pool on like the 1
Right.
versus 2 CTAs. Because if they change the number of CTAs across a full rebrand, it's like, who knows if that one small factor is the variable, right?
So I love it that you can surf publicly for, I'm assuming this is some kind of metadata that shows
Yeah,
which
yeah.
version of a website they're pushing. Is it version A versus version B in an A/B test?
Exactly. You see some variants that occur, like when someone actually runs that test. And then
Hmm.
basically, our job is to use our proprietary technology to essentially scan those pages, understand what's actually different between the two versions. And then
Hmm.
we have dozens of researchers who work on our team. And those researchers track those tests, wait and make sure they pass certain thresholds. So, like if
Hmm.
someone runs a test and they pull it after like 2 days, we're not going to put that in our database. It
Okay.
doesn't have enough time, duration, statistical significance. So there's a whole process of, wait a minimum of 30 days, make sure it crosses this, and this threshold.
Hmm.
And then if they select a winning version, we also wait and make sure that stays steady. Because if they revert to something and then they change it a day later, again,
Right.
it's not a strong signal. So there's a whole
So
bunch that goes into it. But
speaking of, okay, so experiments are the ultimate way to do cause and effect. And in marketing, cause and effect is a real bugaboo. It's really hard to know what causes what, especially when, like you said, you're doing 20 different things and you're changing 30 different things. So you've got a good way to capture and measure the cause part. Like they're doing these A/B splits. In terms of the effect, when you say one of them wins, do you actually measure the traffic on the website, the bounce rates, or do you just infer which one did better by which one the brand went with, assuming that they've got that data and they've looked at it and said, well, B outperformed A, we're going to kill A and run with B nationally.
yeah, good question. So at a surface layer, what we do is we just look from a qualitative perspective, what version do they keep? And that could be for a lot of different reasons. But there's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more depth to it because we work with dozens and dozens of Fortune 500, a lot of the largest brands in the world, and we work very closely with those brands and we actually see that quant data on what
Okay.
is performing. So we have firsthand feedback loops across these different things that show us the actual conversion,
Got
engagement,
it.
click through data across these. So we get a little bit of both the qualitative and the quantitative to
Okay.
inform better tuning our machine.
So when you're on the outside, you got to infer and use whatever public signals you can about which A, B, or C or D did best. But when you're working with a brand, because they're hiring you to actually help analyze the ABCD split tests, then you can actually look at the output and the outcomes to help determine which one did better.
Exactly. And what
Right.
I'll say though is the more volume you have, it
Mm-hmm.
solves a little bit for the quant side, meaning that if we have 10,000
Yeah.
tests and we see 9,000 go one direction, we're pretty damn confident and it's like highly localized for this
Yeah.
industry in this
Yeah.
context on this page. That's like a very, very strong signal. Even taking out all the noise of what is the exact conversion lift, what is all those details, we could come to a client with like very high confidence interval and be like, you should probably do this.
Well, this is in the science world. This would be called inductive reasoning, right? Instead of deductive reasoning. Inductive is let's measure a bunch of stuff and then look for the patterns and look for the universals. And frankly, that's how Isaac Newton figured out the laws of gravity, is by looking at all the movements of all the planets and stars, looking at the movements of apples as they fall from trees. Why do they fall straight towards the earth instead of sideways? Um, and then after doing hundreds or thousands of studies and observations, what generalization can you come out with? Which is, oh, this is great. This is like one of the most sciency marketing organizations I've had on the show so far, which is great. So let's talk, Casey, about one of the things you've found through repeated observation that has surprised you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm super excited to unpack and get your thoughts on this one. So, when I first came to this organization, one of the things that most surprised me when I looked at the data was how often conventional social proof was losing. So, what I mean by that very specifically is you go to a website and it has the customer logo bars right below the
Right.
hero, extremely common.
I
And
work with Deloitte. I work with Harvard. I work with PepsiCo.
exactly. So we found when brands directly A/B tested an identical website, but just removing the logo bar, a lot of the
Mhm.
removed logo bars were winning. And that was
Huh.
very surprising to me. And
Interesting.
we looked across different page types. We also looked at third party proof. So in the software world where I come from, it's like G2, Capterra, Trustpilot, all those types of companies. We saw those badges losing in many situations. We saw
Really?
quote testimonials losing in many situations. So I'm excited to go through some specific examples with you and kind of maybe get your thoughts. But at a high level, that was very surprising because I've always been very bullish on social proof.
Right.
And I still think there's absolutely a place for social proof. We can kind of get to that. But it does seem like the way that a lot of companies are conventionally using it is not moving the needle. And they're kind of maybe just copying an old practice that
Oh man.
everyone puts a logo bar in here. So they're doing it.
Right. Well, it's funny, and not just logo bars. You're saying testimonials and quotes too sometimes don't
Absolutely.
work
Yeah.
as well.
We'll
So,
get into some specific examples of that.
okay, so I love that you called it social proof instead of just testimonials or logo bars, because that itself is a scientific concept, a brand science concept that we require social proof that something is good or bad by just copying others or asking what others do. So that is exactly what a logo bar does. That, oh, this brand has worked with the top 10 electronics companies. We work with Google, we work with Apple, we work with Amazon. And then quotes and testimonials are the same thing, which is it's proof from the social sphere that you are good or that you are high quality or that you do what you say you do. So social proof itself, you're right, is a long-standing principle of how people choose stuff. But you're saying at this point, in A/B splits, websites and pages that have social proof don't do as well as pages that don't.
In a lot of cases, right? Like,
Wow.
yeah, we'll get into some specifics, and I think there's lots of ways that this can be constructed. Like when you say
Yeah.
logo bars, there's lots of ways that you can do a logo bar. But conventional logo bars, which is basically
Mhm.
like a list of logos that says trusted by 10,000 plus companies, we see those losing at a very high percentage.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Do you have a specific example you can share, or
Yeah.
do you want to? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Great.
one example that was tested recently, I'll start with third-party badges, and then I'll give you one that's logo specific as well. One that I was just looking at a while back was from a company called Jotform. On their pricing page, right below their pricing plans, they say Jotform is a trusted G2 leader, 4.7, 4.7, and then they have four different badges of categories. They're a leader in mid-market, they're a leader in enterprise, they're a leader in the summer of 2023, and they're a leader for small businesses. And
Okay.
they tested that against basically just removing that entirely, not having that social proof piece at all. And the one that didn't have it won.
Wow.
So that was an interesting test that
Is
we were kind of just looking at.
are we talking by a large margin? I mean, certainly you've got enough data to know that it's a real effect. It's not just a random sampling effect that, it was a bad Tuesday because it happened to be a holiday. But is it a significant impact on the traffic of the website?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's a significant impact on the traffic. I think specifically
Okay.
here we're looking at conversion and engagement behavior,
Okay.
right? So we're not necessarily looking. This is people already going to the page, and
Yep.
it's what do they do on that page,
Okay.
right? And so the first thing is I'd have to check the exact. We have something called a bet score, which is like the exact statistical aggregation. So if a bet score is like a bet score of 90, that's like
Mhm.
very, very confident. If it's a bet score of 60, it's like it's leaning a little bit towards you probably should consider doing it. And if
Sure.
it's a bet score of like 11 on the other side, it's like this is very, very poor. So
Right.
I remember in the past the inclusion of having these third-party badges on pricing pages as a specific contextual example was
Mhm.
quite low. I want to say it was like a 24 or 25 bet score. So I can
Okay.
find that exact number. But essentially it's saying that a large portion of the companies that are experimenting with including or not including that are removing third-party proof.
Wow. Totally counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's super interesting, and I think there's a lot of evolution in my eyes on like how maybe people are viewing certain platforms. So like
Mhm.
one of the interesting questions becomes, is it all third party proof? Is it G2 specifically? But I also am curious your take. I have kind of two quick theories and I want to
Uh-huh.
get your opinion on.
Okay.
So one is I wonder whether some of this is a problem of unintended signaling. So,
Right.
for example, you include 4.7 stars from 238 reviews. I
Mhm.
read that, I say 238 reviews. Wow, you're small, right?
Right.
So their objective was to build positive proof, but the size of that sampling was negative. Or I was looking at one yesterday, Sage, huge financial company. They have a
Uh-huh.
big bar at the bottom that says 4.0, 4 out of 5 stars on this
Yeah.
thing. My first thought was, ooh, 4 out of 5
Right.
stars. That's not great,
Right.
right? Like it actually is a negative signal to me that you're
Yeah.
displaying that you're 4.0 out of 5 stars. I'm thinking you got to be at least 4.4, 4.5 till that moves into the positive territory. So I wonder, and then also, sorry, the final one I'll say is the outdated years too. When someone
Right.
has including badges from 2023 about being a leader, my head goes, wow, you haven't been a leader for the last 2 years,
You know,
right?
you
So
know, yeah. That's like when you go to a restaurant and it says Best of Boulder 2016 and it's now
exactly.
2025. You're like, well, okay, what's happened in the past 9 years?
So I wonder whether some of this is unintended signaling where these
Yeah.
brands, while they're trying to show this third party, hey, it's not just us, it's a third party, which is like an intuitive call out. Let's call on external authority. But the way that we're thinking about things, I think may have
Yes.
changed and evolved over time, and people might not be seeing some of those same star ratings, some of the
Yep.
same things as positive anymore.
So before I offer some thoughts from my science world, do you have any sense of whether this actually has changed over time? Like, did you have data from 10 years ago or 20 years ago that suggests that it worked better then, or that it's been working less more recently, or it was just a shocking, surprising result?
Yeah, so we have data for about 5 years, so we
Okay,
can't go back a decade, and we only work forward from when the company was founded. We only look at forward-looking data. That's the way this algorithm works. So we can't
sure.
call back. We can use things like Wayback Machine to like go onto old sites and gather,
Mhm.
cobble together some stuff, but we don't
By the
do that
way,
at
though,
scale.
what's the URL for the Wayback Machine?
I honestly don't know. I would just type Wayback Machine, Wayback Machine into Google. Um,
It's web.archive.org. I just looked it up because a lot of people probably have no clue. There is a nonprofit which archives as much of the internet as it possibly can, like massive amounts of storage. And it's just there to be an archive. And it's called the Wayback Machine, which is adorable. And if you want to go look at early versions of Google's homepage, you can do that because it's there, or early versions of what Alta Vista and Lycos and Squarespace, not Squarespace, MySpace looked like. It's
yeah.
okay. So the Wayback Machine,
So
yeah, you can just search on Wayback Machine, but you're right. Okay. So you're only looking forward. You don't have that much of a background in the comparison over time, but you're finding this surprising conclusion that these social proof markers, like having all the logos of your clients, or we have 4.1 star on Trust Barometer, or testimonials, do not do as well.
yeah, and the last
Wow.
thing I'll say before you hop into some thoughts too is to say
Mhm.
that even when it is at volume and quite strong, so there's an example from a company called Navan that puts G2 right above, they put it in the eyebrow, they call it, so above the
Okay.
header, and they say it's like, here, I can look at it directly to see the exact thing. It's 4.7 out of 5 stars with 8,000 plus reviews. So that lost directly, no changes, a one variable test, having that in the eyebrow, 4.7 out of 5, 8K plus reviews versus nothing. So I just include that to say that
Wow.
even though I was kind of saying, well, if it's a small number of reviews or a low star rating, we even see, I would consider that pretty strong, right?
Yeah.
1,000 plus with 4.7. And even that one lost when it was
Wow.
tested directly in a one variable test.
Wow. Okay. So here's a bit of the theory stuff. And interestingly enough, this doesn't come from my time in marketing and branding, although it applies. It comes from my background as a biologist and an ecologist, because I got a PhD in ecology. Of course, obviously, as one does when they go into marketing. But here's the deal. There's a concept called costly signaling theory. Sometimes there's a related thing called honest signaling theory. And the notion is that when you've got organisms that are trying to communicate to each other, and most organisms are nonverbal, that they have to use signals to communicate to each other, and that there is hopefully a penalty for cheating, right? So if let's say mating is a classic one because there's a lot of signaling and mating. Um, where do you live, Casey? What
San
part of
Diego.
San Diego? Okay. So do you see seals or sea elephants or walruses ever?
We see seals all the time. Yeah.
Seals. Okay.
Yeah.
So when seals mate, do you ever see sea elephants or walruses too? Or no, not as much?
Not down there. We do have the sea elephants, but they're up north, up the coast.
Okay.
I used to see them. I used to go when I went to school at Berkeley. I used to go down and go check them out. They're ginormous.
Oh yeah. Okay. So sea elephants are a good example. Sea elephants are these huge, um, they look like mongoloid seals, right? They're enormous and they've got big tusks. And when they mate, they create like a rookery. There's hundreds of them, or maybe even thousands, gather on these rocky islands, and the males compete. And the bigger males with more blubber and more fat and more mass and bigger tusks tend to get more mates, right? So there's a competition for mates, and the females are trying to check out which males are the strongest and the fittest and the most virile. And they want to do that because they want their offspring to have a good chance of surviving and reproducing too. So the females are trying to be choosy, and they're choosing a male based on the signals, not based on, well, you can't do a genetic test. Sea elephants can't do genetic tests on each other to see how good their genes are. So they can only go with what is visible. And in this case, it's how big the sea elephant is, how deep its growl, its whatever the sound is, and then also how big its tusks are. Now, you can imagine that if there's a lineage of sea elephants that could fake that stuff, they would fake it because then they'd get more female mates. Right? So here's where we get to is there's kind of an arms race. The females are trying to find the signals that are honest. And the males are trying to either make those signals better than others or fake it. And ideally, the fake ones should be weeded out, and the females should evolve ways to weed out the fakes. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
So an honest signal is what the females are looking for. And what they end up evolving to choose or selecting for is things that are costly. If it's cheap to fake your growl, then the females should downplay the importance of a growl. But if it's expensive, because you need a big voice box and you need a big sonorous mouth and you need a big diaphragm to blow the air through, then they know it's a good signal. It's a high quality signal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So tusks and antlers are great examples of costly signals because they are costly. Like tusks are expensive to grow and expensive to use. And sometimes they come at a real cost to the sea elephant, and just in terms of how it can forage and how comfortable it is in getting around with these massive tusks. In Colorado here, I think you've got elk out west in California too, but a bull elk, a male elk will grow 40 pounds of antlers in one season. And that's a very costly signal of how healthy it is. So the females have evolved to select for that costly signal. And so it's this arms race about what signals are high quality enough, are honest, and the honest ones are usually costly ones because they're harder to dupe. Does this make sense so far?
It does make complete sense, and my gears are already turning on like one specific example. If I can bring it in, an example of a logo bar that was more successful was from the company Clay. And what Clay did is they didn't just say they worked with OpenAI, they directly linked to a case study, and they directly linked to a case study across a lot of those. So to your point, someone might come in, they're skeptical, but they've gone for a higher lift of providing more validation, a deeper level of proof, in the same way that someone could include a quote or someone can include a video of a member of OpenAI talking. That's a much more trustworthy and harder to fake, to your point, type of signal to get an executive out there to actually speak and talk about your product. So I think that we see that from some of the winning examples, turning the tables a little bit of like what is actually working well. It's this highly specific, highly contextualized, and to your point, this higher lift in some ways. Anyone can slap on a logo. Not everyone can write out a full case study. Not anyone can get an executive from the company to actually talk. And so to a person who's skeptical, okay, you threw that logo in, you could just be lying, right?
Yep.
Just like off the bat.
Yes.
Um, if you have an executive from the company talking, that's probably much more trusted.
Bingo. Great. That's exactly where I was heading with this. So I'm so glad it was making sense. The signals that we should be looking for as skeptical buyers or consumers should be things that are hard to fake, hard to dupe, that are truly costly, because then we can trust them more. And so I'm guessing, just like you said, anyone can put up company logos, and then you don't know if they're completely lying about it. Maybe they don't actually work with OpenAI or Google or Amazon, or maybe they did some tiny project with Amazon 5 years ago, and like that really doesn't have a material impact on their company. So it's a cheap signal, or for just throwing up a quote, a random quote that's not attributed to anyone. This was the best web traffic navigation software I've ever found. It's a cheap signal, and therefore we should learn to ignore it and should look for those costly signals that are harder to fake.
100%. And
Yeah.
that also ties in, we're touching on a bunch of these different social proof things, but I think of a company, there's a company called Winter, Winter, and they had an example of like winning testimonials. And one of the things I appreciated about their winning testimonials is it was like a true before and after in the context of that role. So someone was like, I stepped in as a VP of XYZ. This was our situation. This was our current deal flow, whatever. We made this transition and we did all these things. When I read that, that's so much more powerful than we increase revenue or leads or some generic outcome that we see. And I won't go off the rails, but I just want to say this is a very interesting transition I've seen too. When I started to cut my teeth a decade ago, they always said, don't talk about features, talk about outcomes. And what's fascinating looking at the testing data is how often what I call capabilities is winning now. I just did a whole research project on like AI positioning, and I looked at services selling agentic products, and it's literally like you can take the top 10 and you could just mix and match them. They're all the same. Orchestrate and build AI workflows, AI automation. And I had to go, it was number 8 on the list before I got to a company, like I think it was called Docket AI, that said, we help you, our agents help you with booking, qualification. Like it actually explained what the thing did. And I was like,
Right.
This is a fascinating problem that has emerged.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I love that you are seeing this notion that the effort that goes into the social proof is what makes it work when it does work. Like having an actual video testimonial from a client instead of just their logo, having an actual case study linked to the logo instead of just the logo, having specific quantitative examples or specific outcomes from your clients instead of just we worked with them. And that takes more effort. It's like growing antlers or growing tusks.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I'm curious to get your thoughts on as well around that is the role of affinity in successful social proof. So the other thing I think about, so one, the test I was looking at was Dropbox. Dropbox tested out of their logo bar. They had it on their page. They removed it. And their logos were all the like biggest companies, right? It was like Figma and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And part of what I wonder is whether this is also a problem. Someone sees a logo bar, it's a bunch of like good, impressive companies, but I'm like a small startup. I have 6 people. So I look at a company and I'm like, you work with Google and you worked with Figma, you worked with all these huge public companies. How is that relevant for me as a 15-person company or whatever? I think that often becomes a miss because people want to show what's most in their eyes impressive. They want the optics. If I show a small business, you won't even know who that company is. So what's the point? So it's this kind of catch-22. If you show a small company, nobody knows who that is. So is there even any point? But if you show a big company and you're selling to SMBs as a primary part of your market, like Dropbox does, you're kind of in this tough situation if you don't find a way to differentiate that.
And SMBs being small and medium businesses?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is also where the concept of signaling and honest signaling or costly signaling does have something to say about these things, because the signals have to be relevant to those doing the assessment. You're right. So here's another cheesy example. Let's say you're an athlete of some sort. I don't know. Do you do any kind of sports or athletics?
I was a track runner.
Okay, you're a track runner. Great. So you're looking for signals of whether someone's a good track runner. And it might be the equipment they wear. It might be the tone of their calves. It might be how they warm up, right? It might be some of the names that they drop, like the coaches they've worked with or the meets that they've been in. If someone from World Wrestling Federation shows up and they've got the belt or the 3 belts and they've got the like funny outfit on and they've got the walk-in music, right? These are all great signals, but it's totally irrelevant to a track runner. And so it does absolutely have to be very particularly relevant to the audience that's trying to make the assessment. And that is hardware. If you're selling to small and medium businesses, the signals have to be relevant to small and medium companies as opposed to mega global corporations like Samsung or Apple or OpenAI. Yeah, it's got to be relevant to those assessing your brand.
Yeah, totally. And there's a couple companies, 7 Shifts, for example, serves to restaurants, and they actually have a bar where you can toggle between the options. So pizzeria, coffee shop, etc. Now, the problem, though, I would argue, again, though, but if they're smaller companies, there's still this recognition issue. But I think that what I said earlier is a way you potentially could solve for it, which is that if I'm looking through, I see a bunch of logos. Now, they're maybe relevant logos to me. They're small businesses, but I don't recognize them. What would help is if it was attached to a case study or something material, because that would actually be interesting to me. If I click in, it's like, here's how a 15-person company coffee shop, and I'm a coffee shop, and I click in, it says, here's how they use it. Now I care, because even if I don't recognize the logo, I care about this is how your exact type of business found success or got to this outcome. So I think there's ways that people could make that work by kind of combining maybe some of those ideas.
That's fascinating. That's like, in terms of designing sites, it's kind of a self-segmentation. Like imagine coming to like a web restaurant store and you click on something that says, I am a blank or a blank or a blank. And you get to choose. I am a single cafe. I am a manager of a chain. I am a manager of a global chain franchise. And then that takes you to stuff that is more relevant. And then you would need those signals there that are costly enough to show that they're valuable, to show that they're honest.
Yeah, it's funny you say this because I just did a post 2 days ago about my favorite experiment of the year. And my favorite experiment of the year was a company called Sage. And at the top, it says, what is your industry and what is your company size? And when you click those in, I tried it for myself. And I said 11 to 20 employees, software company. And what I get as an outcome is a completely tailored homepage that's talking about SaaS pain points, SaaS messaging, SaaS regulations, all the way through. All the pieces of that page are tailored. And I was like, this is fascinating, because I always hear about personalization. I come from the email world too. Everyone talks about personalization. But I think a lot of times when I've seen companies attempt this in the past, they've actually done it through like pop-ups. Like you're scrolling and it's like, what are you? And I'm so like, my brain, if I see a pop-up and I'm on a website, I just like instinctively click out of it.
Click it, close. It's so annoying.
I don't want to look at it.
It's disruptive. It's interruptive.
But when Sage did that, I actually think it was kind of fascinating because it was choice. You could just go through the page as you want, but the choice to do it, I did it, and I was so pleasantly surprised by the level of customization. I was like, this is great. And I reckon that the majority of large brands at scale already have these industry-specific pages.
Correct.
They built them and they run paid traffic. So it wouldn't even be that much of a lift for them to essentially just create a better routing mechanism to those. So I can't speak from a data standpoint because this is one experiment, N size of one. But I think that's really interesting. And I'm going to be tracking to see if more brands do that and what the conversion data says about, because I feel quite confident that SaaS companies are going to convert better on that customized SaaS page than they would have on the general Sage homepage, which to be candid is very vague and very broad.
Where did you write about this? Was this on
LinkedIn? LinkedIn is like my major place that I distribute content. So you guys can find, we can share that for folks if they want to check it out.
Okay. But, there are probably a few Casey Hills on LinkedIn. So we'll have to make sure people get to the right Casey Hill with do
Yeah.
what works. Okay. Do you also post stuff about this on your insights page on your website?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have a blog where we do a bunch of like deep dives where we'll take a lot of these insights and we'll go through like an entire website and we'll kind of unpack these different pieces. And then we also have a newsletter. So every week I'll share interesting tests. I'll say, here's 3 AI tests
Nice.
from OpenAI, from IBM, from XYZ brands, and then my analysis, my thoughts. And recently we've brought on our head of research, who's much smarter than I am, who gives the inside scoop as a researcher. So we kind of
Nice.
give the marketing vantage point and the research vantage point, which is not always aligned. So that's
Oh,
also really interesting.
absolutely. That's at dowhatworks.io.
Yes, correct. DoWhatWorks.io.
Dowhatworks.io.
And Substack is just like Substack.dowhatworks. We can share that with folks, but it's just
Yeah,
the
we'll have that all
Substack
in the
dot.
notes, in the show notes, so people can get it there. But in case anyone just wanted to jump right now to dowhatworks.io and then click on the insights home or insights button.
Yeah, just click on Insights. It will take you right into a bunch of that data.
That's fantastic. I love this. I love this stuff because it's a beautiful marriage of the art, the dark art, and the science, and the theory, but the practice, right? And you're doing all of this empirical research. You've got so much empirical data, so many observations, and sometimes it really does help to have a theory to explain it.
Yeah,
And
100%. I think that was
yeah,
one of the biggest things we've been exploring this year is trying to get to that why. And I love
yeah.
the bringing
So
in of some of the biology theory to it.
we will do a follow-up because I know we have to talk about AI. That's a wholly different topic. And we will also do a follow-up to find out, as you all discuss that notion of honest signaling and costly signaling, does that give you a framework to explain why these things are not working? And it seems like it on the surface, it does help explain it, that these things have become too cheap and therefore too easy to fake and therefore not valuable.
Yeah, I agree. But I think everything you're saying is 100% accurate. What's interesting is like the role of changing consumer, like the kind of meta environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you're saying, like there could be a case in nature where an animal learns a certain roar or whatever, but then over time, maybe for whatever reason, that becomes too easy to replicate. Right.
Correct.
And then it's no longer costly. So I think I think it was like Cialdini wrote the book Influence a million years ago, which was like
Yes.
a top psychology book. In that book, it talks about this is the ideal star rating for a company. This is like, it goes through all these principles. Now, the interesting question would be decades later, is it still the case, right? That those star ratings that they talked about from 2000, now that we're 25 years later, how has that evolved? My intuition says as a
Yep.
society gets more used to these types of things, that has evolved and changed in interesting ways. And like I think that like I ran, this is very non-scientific or very like small sample size rather, but I ran a test to N size 400 people, a poll in 2024, and I
Okay.
asked SaaS people specifically, people who worked at SaaS companies.
Uh-huh.
I said 3.5 to 3.9, rate it negative, neutral, positive.
Right.
4.0 to 4.4, and then I went through all the different rankings. And what was not surprising is anything below 4 was negative.
Right.
That's expected. But what I thought was very surprising, for me at least, the 4.0 to 4.4, the majority of votes, the vast majority of votes were neutral, which kind of makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. But then there was like 32 negative and only 9 positive. So
Wow.
that's kind of fascinating. Out of 400 people,
Right.
only 9 SaaS buyers said a 4.0 versus 4 to 4.4 was a positive signal for the product. And as
Wow.
someone who stares at websites, I can tell you, I know this because I'm looking at websites all day.
Huh?
There is thousands of websites that are displaying 4.0 to 4.4 stars proudly as their social proof of
And
go
they
buy
think
our
it's good.
product, and they think it's good. So that's a huge thing to be like, wow,
Yeah.
that's a potentially missed situation there.
That's like showing up to the track in a unitard as a guy,
Right?
right? I mean,
Yeah.
women run in unitards, but men don't tend to. And so
Yeah.
it's the wrong signal. And you think you're buff, and actually it's 4.0 to 4.4, not such a great signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was just super interesting.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. As a total aside, and I am coming to you from the speakeasy that I also run. I accidentally ended up becoming the best bar in Boulder for a little while, and I had 4.9 stars. And
4.9.
so
See, So 4.9 seems, I actually think that's a whole other code. I think 4.9 is better than 5.0. I think
Right.
5.0 feels fake. If I
Hmm.
was to say this is like my personal, I think probably 4.7 to 4.9 with a volume of at least like say a couple hundred reviews, to
Yep.
me I think is probably like the sweet spot. Like if I'm looking at a restaurant just from a personal consumer perspective, or a hotel, or like an Uber, it has 4.8, 4.9 stars and 1,000 reviews. That's like a
Yep.
very positive signal. I'm like, I
Yep.
feel a lot of confidence in that.
And I'm sure folks like hotels.com, Amazon, Netflix, and Uber have done a lot of research on where that sweet spot is and what the distribution might entail. Like, what is it really communicating when you show up in a unitard, when you have a 4.4 or a 4.7? Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Okay, we could talk about this a lot longer, but we're going to stop here because it's just too good. Too good. Casey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
We will talk, like I said, more in the future about other things from Do What Works, and we'll have all the details for how to reach out to Casey in the show notes. But the company is dowhatworks.io, and Casey Hill is also on LinkedIn. And of course, you can find me at Applied Brand Science and lots of other places online. Casey, thanks. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
You as well.
That's it for this episode. If anything stuck with you from today's show, good. That's the point. Be simple, be sticky, and stay classy, San Diego. If today's conversation made you rethink something about your business, consider calling us to get more formal help for your brand or your team. I run workshops and strategy sessions to turn science into success. Cliche, that's cheesy. Learn more at appliedbrandscience.com.